Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a historical humans heritage. And today we are back on the UNESCO World Heritage List looking at Kronborg Castle based out of Denmark. And Kronborg is quite interesting because most people would recognize it, but maybe not from a picture or from the looks.
Yeah,
Is that
no,
enough of a
that's
cliffhanger?
that's that's fine. So yeah, Kronborg has received world fame and attention for hundreds of years due to the fact that it is the setting of the Shakespearean play Hamlet, also known as What You Did in 10th Grade and Completely Forgot About Afterwards.
God, we had to watch like 8 renditions of it. It was awful.
Uh, Uh, Kronborg Castle itself was built in 1574 to defend the Sound, which is a passage of water between Denmark and Sweden. It was built on the Danish side. It is a Danish royal castle, and it was instrumental in defending this strait for several hundred years. It was retrofitted in the 17th century, so about 100 years after it was built to better defend its installation, and it remains perfectly intact to this day. The This castle is one of those that was not sacked, ruined, or left to rot, and thus it's preserved for us as it was back in olden times for the most part.
Which, from the pictures that I'm showing on screen, which if you click through, you could see the defensive fortifications with the wall. You can see the moat around it. You know, it very much was built with defense in mind. You can see the ramparts and everything. It
Yeah,
it truly
yeah,
is a beautiful work of art, and for being a medieval castle, I mean, you could see the ornate architecture, the stonework, the marble work.
yes. It's very beautiful, and one of the key things with why this castle itself is so important is again with controlling the sound. Um, 1.8 million ships passed through the sound during the period in which this castle was an active military installation, and every ship that passed through from the Baltic Sea that went through this narrow passage, which is the only passage out, had to pay a toll to Kronberg, which not only enriched Kronberg and the Danish crown, but also made it the symbol for Denmark's power. Um, it made it the symbol of the Danish monarchy and of the nation itself. So it becomes very emblematic of the country just by virtue of the fact that this is their fortification.
Yeah, and I mean, to control a choke point like that is instrumental both in the matter of trade and earning money with that regard. But it's just a very beautiful castle, and it was also um, it was also used as a political tool. I mean, negotiations took place. They would favor specific trades. They used it to create alliances, and it became a really big instrumental part of a lot of wars.
Yep. Oh yes, oh yes, definitely. It was a sorry. It was a key defensive hall. In fact, defenses on the island go all the way, or in the place where Kronborg is, go all the way back to the 1420s,
Yeah.
which predates its existence as a proper castle by 150 years. It's not till King Frederick II builds a true Renaissance castle on the site that it moves from being a fortification to being what we would recognize as a full castle. And this is a Renaissance castle. This thing comes with its own chapel and pews. It comes with its own art gallery, its own courtyard.
Which
Renaissance castles were as much art and luxury as they were military installations.
And kind of interesting about the chapel is there was a fire that took place in in the castle in 1629, and it was the only place left untouched and unravaged by the fire. So the altar, the pews, all the artwork in there is still original, whereas the castle itself was reconstructed in 1629. So only like 50 years after it was originally built.
Yeah. Yeah, in 1629 or 1574, that's still several hundred years ago. Both instances would be completely worthy of World Heritage, and it is always fun to see that the chapel survives when everything else doesn't. Uh,
God
espe-
protected this one area.
yeah, yeah, especially given the you know just the implications of a relative theocracy, which this the Kingdom of Denmark was in the early 17th century. It gives that sort of divine providence of no matter what, God is on our side. yeah, yeah, and that's very useful for rulers in a lot of ways. Um,
The castle itself, though, besides the destruction, has faced a few nicks to its history. Mainly in
mhm.
1658, the fortress was bombarded and conquered by the Swedish army. Remember, we
Yep.
said there were a couple of wars fought over this area.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
they plundered the castle. And then in 1785, the military moved into the castle. Several alterations were made to the space. And then in 1928 to 38, they actually restored it after the military had left.
Yeah. Yeah. And as of 1991, Kronborg is no longer considered a military area. It is this is basically this sort of outlet is no longer how they choose to guard the waters off their coast. So it has been completely demilitarized, which means that it is free for a lot of tourism and a lot of historical restorations and archaeology to take place, which is always very nice because there's nothing quite as annoying as that pesky military base in the middle of our dig zone.
Well, and there's a story I could tell you off camera, but
Um,
um, it's also kind of interesting too because the Elsinore shipyard was founded in 1882, and parts of the fortifications were actually destroyed to make room for this. And when the shipyard closed in 1982, so exactly 100 years later, they
yeah.
actually conducted restoration projects to restore the fortifications and to
Mhm.
rebuild them in the exact shape and locations.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
really put a
And
lot of effort into trying to really preserve this as it was.
yeah, so they've taken a lot of effort. They've even replicated the carvings on a lot of the sandstone that was either damaged or destroyed. They took sketches, images, and other such things, and imitations from other parts of the castle and made replicas. Like they actually went all in on making sure that everything was as accurate as humanly possible. Um, One other thing to mention is, like before we mentioned that this was the scene of Shakespeare's Hamlet. This was the location that the play is set in, and the reason for that is because Kronberg's banquet hall is known as the Great Hall, and it is the largest banqueting hall in Northern Europe, which is part of what drew the attention of the bard, and sort of said, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to talk about this sort of Germanic prince, Danish people, Germanic people, potato, potato. Let's put it in this big, famous, fancy hall." I'm sure I can smudge those numbers later. We're talking a London audience here. They're not going to know the difference.
Hey.
If they couldn't tell the difference between Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland when all of them were raiding you, they're not going to know the difference now.
It's all Norse to me, anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Uh,
I think that's a good point. Or no, last thing we should talk about is the protection because that's what we always do for
oh
the
yes.
store.
Yes, the protection. That's very important.
Which they
Uh,
established a 100-meter buffer zone around the entire castle area to keep it protected. But then they are also listed buildings and protected with the Preservation of Buildings Act and the Museum Act, which
mhm,
means any changes have to go through the Danish Agency for Culture.
yeah. And with this too. They've actually streamlined the bureaucracy around this, as Kronborg Castle, Elsinore City Council, and the Danish Agency for Culture have all joined forces to unify on conditions, buffer zones, etc., so that the municipal level, uh, you know, the federal, state level, and the actual castle itself all have the same guidelines that they are working from at all times, which is a really nice thing to see because a lot of times you see, the federal, like a state level government implement one law and then the municipal government implement another slightly contradictory law that ends up creating this zone of, well, what the hell happens here? And they've gone out of their way to make sure that that's not going to happen because we all wrote the exact same law in our charter. It's a good way to make it impossible to repeal something.
Uh, good old
Yep.
Good
Yeah.
old protection laws. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, please let us know. And if there's a UNESCO World Heritage Site or National Register site you want us to talk about, please leave that down below. And we will see you guys in the next video.